Today's daf is daf Gimel, and we'll start with Omar Mar. V'shilach zu haregel, v'cheinu omer mishalche regel hashor v'chamor. And the Gemara is quoting the Brisa that was quoted originally on daf Beis, that the source for regel is the word v'shilach, and the Gemara proves that from a special pasuk, mishalche regel hashor v'chamor. So the Gemara asks immediately, Taima, are you telling me that v'shilach es be'era can only be interpreted as regel because the kosav rachmana mishalche regel shor v'chamor habalav hachi b'mai mukwasle? What was your vacillation? What were the different possibilities here in interpreting the pasuk of v'shilach es be'era, such that you needed to be machriya by quoting the pasuk of mishalche regel hashor v'chamor? Ibe Karen, if there's a havamina that the pasuk itself of v'shilach is referring to Karen, ksiv. The Torah says explicitly in Parshas Mishpatim elsewhere, ki yigov shor ish. Ve'ibe shen ksiv, and even if you'll tell me that the shilach as a be'ira is referring to Shane, we have another pasuk, ubir b'stei acher, from which the Brisa already derived Shane. And the Gemara says, Itzrich, I still need the extra pasuk of mishalchi regel hashor v'chamor, because if I only had the pasuk v'shilach as a be'era, salkedach amin, I might have thought idi ve'idi Hashem. We need two psukim to teach us Shen, and that would mean that both are avos. Had machal yikarna v'had lo machal yikarna. You could have a case where the animal eats the very roots of the tzemach, of the growth, and that's called machal yikarna. It would not instate itself. And then you could have lo machal yikarna, where the animal just eats the fruit, but the roots are still situated untouched in the ground, and they will produce fruit in the future. So the Gemara asks, Hashta do kimna regel Shane de lo machal yikarna minalan. You don't have an extra pasuk by Shane because you took the pasuk v'shilach zabeira and you interpret it as regel. Then how do I know lo machal yikarna, that even in a case where the fruit was taken away and consumed by the animal, but the roots are still there to reproduce, how do I know he's chayav for such a thing? And the Gemara answers, Dumya the regel. We now could take the case of Shane and compare it to regel, because it's all written in one context. V'shilach as a be'ira, which is regel, and ubir b'stei acher, which is Shane. And therefore, ma regel lo shana machal yikarna, lo shana lo machal yikarna. In the case of regel, the Torah says v'shilach as a be'ira. It doesn't say ubir. Bir would mean there are different levels and categories of consumption. No, it says v'shilach. And that includes bein machal yikarna, bein lo machal yikarna. That's in Karen, is af Shane. By virtue of the equation, we derive the conclusion that Shane likewise lo shana machal yikarna, lo shana lo machal yikarna. Omar Mar, we saw in the Brisa that ubir zo hashen v'cheinu omer kasher yivar agolol ad tumo taima because rachmana kasher yivar atoma gul al ad tumo ha belav hachi. We could have taken this pasuk of ubir b'stei acher and we could have used it for something else. B'mayu kimnola, what would we use for it? B'karen ksiv, ibe regel ksiv. In Karen, we already have the pasuk of Yigov Shar Ish, and in Regel, we already have the pasuk of Shilach Zabira. So why did the Torah need a new pasuk that seems to be interpreted according to the Brisa as Shane when we already know Shane? Or, well, let's put it this way: we know Karen and Regel, and therefore it would have to be Shane. So why do we need the extra pasuk? Kasher Yivara Gol Al Tumo. Itzra, I would think, Idi, both V'shilach and Ubir regel, and there are two categories of regel. Ha, the Ozil B'mela, ha, the Shalach Shluche. There's a case where the animal on its own volition, since he wasn't protected and it wasn't supervised, it went out on its own initiative and ate from another field, or if it didn't eat from another field, it walks and stomps on the ground and smashes things on its own volition. But what about a case of shiluche mishalcha? And probably if we only had one pasuk, we would use it for shiluche shalcha, where he sends it out. He gives the animal a smack in the back, and the animal goes out and eats from somebody else's field. No, we need an extra pasuk by Regel to teach me that even in the case of Ka'asel B'Mela, it's also Chai. So the Gemara asks, Hashta de Uki Ashen. Now you used the pasuk beer, you took it away from Regel. Is Regel the Asel B'Mela B'Nolan? How do we know that you're chayav even for a case of a Regel where the animal went out on its own? To me, the Shane, once again, we have a hekesh, but now in the reverse order. Ma Shane lo shna, shiluche shloche, lo shna the Asel B'Mela. In the case of Shane, it makes no difference whether he sent the animal ate on its own volition. Af Regel lo shna shalcha l'shucha, lo shna Asel B'Mela. Gemara asks, well, lichtov rachmana v'shilach v'lo bayu bir. Why don't we derive from v'shilach both Shane and Regel? And then the Torah didn't have to write ubir. Mashma, the word v'shilach would imply Regel. But umashma, at the same time, the word v'shilach could imply Shane. And therefore, mashma Regel d'chsiv mishalchi Regel shavachamor, mishalchi Shane d'chsiv v'Shane be'emes ashalapam. So ilav. So why don't we derive both from one pasuk? And the more answers no. Ilav dekra yisef, not for the extra pasuk ubir. Hava, I would have thought that o Regel davi ezeko matzik, o Shane tiesh hanola zeko. Each one of these two avos, whether it's Regel or Shane, has its own particular type of nezek. There's a nezek which is matzui, right? The animal is always walking, and it could be mazik. And then there's hezek, which is not so matzui. Like, for example, Shane. Shane, okay, maybe the animal will eat, maybe it won't. So the Gemara says, Michtei shkulim heim yavo shneim. Well, you know what? Shane has its chumrah. It's yesh hanol zeko. Regel has its chumrah. It's hezeko matzui. And now, with each one of these chumras, we could derive whatever nezika we want to derive. So the Gemara answers, Itzruk Salka Dakabina Hani Mili Hechi Deshilach Shluche Aval Ozav Melilo Kamash Malon. So again, even though Shane and Regel each has its own characteristic mazik element, whether it's Yeshano Zeko in the case of Shane or Hezeko Motz in the case of Regel, you cannot take both of them because you're always going to be left out as far as Azla de Memela. We're going to say that in Shane Regel, the Torah says Yechai, but only because Shalachi Shlucha, you sent the animal out. But if the animal went on its own volition, Memela, you should be potter. Kamash Malon, that's why I need Ubir to tell us that Shane Regel are Chayovim, even if he's Holech Me'aleim to Ka'azla Memela. Told him the Shane Ma'in is Chacha Ba'kosel Anosa. It's not only when the animal eats and consumes for its own benefit, but even if it scratches itself up against a wall and it knocks down the wall, that's also called shame. And so too, tinfa peres lana osa, when, let's say, the animal is misgalgil, it like rolls over and smashes peros, and all this is done lana osa, these are told us of shame because of hanola zeko. Ma'ishna shein yesh hanola zeko umamon chushmiras alecha hani nami yesh hanola zekon umamon ushmiras alecha. So basically, the Gemara is coming to the conclusion that In the case of Shane, you can't say told the same lav kayotze behen. There's no difference between the av and the tolda, just that it's always motivated by hana in different forms. Ella told us to Shane Viki when Rav Papa said that told the same lav kayotze behen, I told the regel. And once again, the Gemara is going to try to analyze why is it not told the same kiyotze behen? Why is it told the same lav kiyotze behen in the case of regel? Told the regel mahi. What would be a told of regel? Hizika begufa derech hilucha. It was mazik something with its body as it walks. Besara derech hilucha. And bishlif shaleh befrumia shebefia bezog shebetzavara. Whether it's the masa that's on the back of the animal, whether it's the reins that are in the animal's mouth, or the bell that's carried around its neck. All of these are told of the regel. Ma'ishna regel de hezek matzui moncho shmirosan olecha. Haninami hezekad matzui mamoncho shmirosan olecha. That's all hezek matzui. Ella told of the regel keregel. Vichi ka'amar. Papa told of the bar. Let's check that possibility out. The Gemara says told of the bar mai. If he digs down 10 tfachim, that's called kidei lahamis. And therefore, if somebody would fall there, he could die. That's a case of the zikin. But for tolda tisha, the bar itself is only 9 tfachim, and it cannot kill, under normal circumstances, a human being. And it can only be mazakim, it can break a leg and so forth and so on. So therefore, I need another pasuk to teach me that told the same kiyotze ben, maybe told the same lav kiyotze ben in the case of bar eser and told the tisha. Gemara rejects that. Lo tisha ksivi v'lo asara ksivi. Torah doesn't mention anything about 9 tefachim. The Torah doesn't mention anything about 10 tefachim. And therefore, just like the 10 tefachim deep bar is called an av, so too the 9 tefachim deep bar is also called an av. So we're still looking for a tolda. And it's got to be told the same lavkot. Our answer is holokasha. The bar in the Torah is a bar that's asar tefachim, and the animal dies when it hits the ground. V'kimlu l'rabbanan asara avdin misa al, but tisha nizikin avde misa lo avd. So basically, the Gemara is saying that you have an av and a tolda in a bar asara, which is memis, and a bar tisha, which is not memis. It's only the zikin. It could be mazik. So Gemara rejects it. Sof. Se'avla misa v'ze'avla nezikin. Although you're correct, there are 2 different categories of bar, but each one is an av. The av for misa is going to be asara tvachim. The av for nezikin is going to be 9 tvachim. So therefore, the Gemara holds that bar, whether it's asara tvachim or 9 tvachim, it's always an av. Ella, what about Rav Papa's statement told to say lav kayotze ben? So we're now going back to bar. But there are 2 types of bar. There's one bar that is stationary, which means the mazik doesn't go to the nizak. The nizak, on the contrary, goes to the mazik. And then we have Avno Sakina Maso, which is a case where if we assume that Avno Sakina Maso, Hinicham B'Shus Rabim is a told of bar, so we now have a new source for the told of bar. And the Gemara once again is going to prove that Amna Sakinim Asol Shenich Brosh Gagam is identical in its dinim and its kapara to the Av itself. Hechidon. What's the case of Avnum Sakinim Asol? Idi Afkarinu. And now we get into the machlok between Rav and Shmuel. So what happens in the case of bar b'shus harabim, where he digs a bar b'shus harabim, or alternatively, he takes an object outside of b'shus and puts it in b'shus harabim in a way that the passers-by will be damaged. Is then, if he's mafkir, then everybody, both Rav and Shmuel, say Hainu bar, he's chayav mishum bar. So we can't say that Toldoseim lav kayotze behen is a reference to bar, because they're similar and identical one to the other. In other words, there's no logical, justifiable reason why, even in the case of Afkarinu, we shouldn't differentiate. We should differentiate between the Av and the Told. Because again, whether it's Afkarinu or not Afkarinu, it's always going to be a bar. And the Gemara on the top of Daf Gimel and Beis, the law of Afkarinu. So once again, if he was not mafkir the Avno Sakino Maso, then we get into the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel.